The Countryside in March, a programme illustrating with sounds and voices the varied nature of the British countryside, the many activities of both work and recreation to be found there in this month of the year. The programme is introduced by C. Gordon Glover.
Go gather gladness from the skies, take a lesson from the ground. Flowers do ope their heavenward eyes, and a springtime joy have found. Earth throws winter's robes away, decks herself for Easter Day. Beauty now for ashes wear, perfumes for the garb of woe, chaplets for dishevelled hair, dances for sad footsteps slow. Open wide your hearts that they let in joy this Easter Day. The end at last of this restless, uneasy month, capering about the village like a clown with a buffeting bladder in one hand and a water can in the other. March, which scowled and snorted through the bare trees upon the one day, then smiled upon the next, and spangled the old gravel pit with yellow coltsfoot. A week where the orchard crocuses were closed up and soggy in the surly rain, then days when the sun shone and the miraculous little chalices opened up and offered the rich yolk of their pollen to the delirious bees. Almond flowers taut and waiting for the starting gun of true spring, with the merciless beauty of the bullfinch pair nipping that other beauty in the bud. Yet who from his kitchen window could blow a bullfinch to pieces? Not for years, surely, can there have been a March more capricious than this one. The Met men, of course, have the truth of the matter, and here's Bill Douglas with his report.
During March, the sun passes over the equator, and the polar regions are at their coldest. So we get the maximum temperature difference between these two areas, and this often results in violent weather changes taking place in our latitudes. The first 10 days of this month gave no indication of anything unusual happening, being similar to the settled weather of February, cold and dry, with easterly winds and good sunny spells. There were falls of snow on the 6th and 7th, Guernsey and parts of Kent and Surrey reporting 4 inches. But during the next few days, places as far apart as Bognor and Bridlington reported 10 hours of sunshine, although the cold easterly winds kept the temperatures down to 1 or 2 degrees above freezing. By the 12th, milder air was spreading into southwest England, bringing cloud and rain, which moved steadily northeast over Wales and southern England. The cold easterlies persisted over the northeast of Britain, and although the mild air was reinforced by a further supply on Friday the 13th, it made no further progress. Here is a good case for the superstitious, for the weekend that followed was most unpleasant. In the northeast, the winds whipped up to gale force, reaching over 70 miles an hour at Aberdeen and the Shetlands. Temperatures from Norfolk to East Scotland were only a degree or 2 above freezing, whereas in Penzance, winds were light southwesterly with temperatures up to 13 degrees centigrade. In between these two areas, which includes most of Great Britain, a steady downpour began during Friday night and continued well into Sunday. In the north and east, heavy falls of snow seriously affected traffic, but in many southern and central districts, prolonged rain gave a total of over 2 inches, which is more than the average for the whole month. On Sunday, the cold easterlies took control again, forcing the mild air westwards and turning the rain to snow in the south. Cold and cloudy days followed, with a good covering of snow on the ground until midweek, even in the south, when once more the mild air spread north again, bringing more rain and snow, which was now getting pretty deep, 9 inches of level snow being reported near Wakefield in Yorkshire. This time, however, there was no wavering, and by the 20th, the milder air had extended to the whole of the British Isles to bring temperatures up to normal and freedom from frost. A second week of wet, cloudy weather followed, with the result that in spite of the first half being very dry, we have had the wettest March since 1947, which was the wettest on record. Don't let's start complaining yet, though, even if Easter is not all we would wish for. We still need a good deal more rain to make up our winter supply.
However grey some March mornings may have been, and grey they doubly seemed when summertime arrived, however dim the dawns, there was bird song threaded through them, and the springtime courtship cooing of the white doves in the sycamore tree. In the sleety rain which poured down through one of those earlier March mornings, the first fledgling of the new year was mercilessly dragged from the shelter of the dovecot by its parents and bidden to face the facts of life. What conditions for the first flopsy flight from dovecot to lilac tree, and stark immobility in the wind and drenching rain, with all the perils of a grounding awaiting below. And could the return flight upwind be made, high to the tree trunk, and relative comfort there? It was made, just, but the welcome was the push-off again. From inside the dovecot sound the voices of other squeakers. Very soon there'll be 20 white doves circling between Sycamore and Church Tower, where a week or two ago there were 12. Daily to the resident voices of the doves are added other songs of the springtime soloists begin to become a chorus. Here's Eric Sim to talk about some of its component parts.
Each month, before I sit down to write my contribution to this program, I read carefully through my notes and review all the events that I've chronicled from the first day onwards. I recall the vagaries of the weather and watch once more the whole pattern of the countryside unfold before me. Sometimes there's a continuous theme running through the whole month: snow, sun, harvest, migration. Sometimes I see no theme at all, just a hodgepodge, a ragbag of unconnected days. This past month, as you've already heard, blizzard, sun, rain, frost, gales and floods have followed hard upon each other's heels. Yet there has been a link for me, a sound that has gone on courageously throughout all the days. The song of the mistle thrush or stormcock. I heard it on the 1st of March beneath the shadow of the South Downs, and since that day, from Middlesex west through every county as far as Hereford. There have been days when the sun has shone pleasantly warm on one's back, and the blackbirds have sung their carols, the honeybees have come to the crocus flowers, and the blowflies have halted for a moment on the bonnet of one's car. In many an elm tree, the rooks have begun serious repairs to their last year's nests, and their voices have taken on the quality of spring. Towards the end of the second week, I travelled to South Warwickshire, to days of grey and sullen mistiness, as well as days of sun and towering white cumulus cloud. The blackbirds here were hesitant, and for some days not inclined to sing much. On the other hand, the hedge sparrows, skylarks and yellowhammers around and above the red-brown fields sang incessantly. From almost every hedge-top, a cock yellowhammer, resplendent in gold and chestnut, sang his half-dozen shrill notes, often ending with one of higher pitch. One afternoon, I went to watch the dusk fall by the edge of a mixed wood of thorns, birch, ash, and oak. Fieldfares and redwings came into roost in the thorns and birches. As the sun began to set, the redwings started up a low, babbling chorus of their sub-songs, punctuated from time to time by a short, rich phrase of song. This sound is one that can often be heard in the winter quarters, usually towards the end of their stay, and before departure to Scandinavia and northern Europe. The whole performance is quiet and restrained, yet the concert is unmistakable. By this time, it was almost dark. In the western sky, Jupiter, Venus, and the satellite Echo 1 made a fine triangle of light. Then the thrushes, blackbirds, and robins began to sing. The chorus was late, but by no means unwelcome. A woodcock came gliding out from between the birches. From the dark woodland came the sharp triple bark of a fox and the wailing scream of a vixen. Both sexes can give the sharp bark and the scream, but the former is more usually given by the dog and the latter by the vixen. For me, bird chorus and fox duet provided a fitting close to the end of this March day.
Countryside traditions of Eastertide are eternally renewable and renewed. Throughout Holy Week, the country people come to the churchyards with flowers, clippers, and hand forks to do honour to the graves. It's always so. And it's always so that Good Friday, or at least half of it, is dedicated to turning the old mire of winter into a tilth upon garden or allotment. It's Gardener's Day. Always was, it always will be. Our old friend Albert Butler is a professional gardener, but of course he has a garden of his own to look after, as well as that of the big house.
Easter, the most wondrous and gladsome time, when gardeners by the million bestir themselves and, flaunting their cheery optimism, spend rather more than they meant to on seeds, sundries, and tools. But there's comfort in the idea that money so spent is an investment. Time will show that it's nothing of the kind, but I should be the last to discourage them. Let them have their fling, for the health-giving fresh air and the exercise are certainties anyway. And what better time for renewed hope? This is Easter's gift and message. So let's press on, thankful that we are in a better position this spring. The winter was kind to us. Gardening has been possible and pleasurable throughout. I don't remember such a cooperative winter in my 44 years at the game. The recent snow and copious rains may have delayed and dismayed some gardeners, but we do well to remember that water is the beginning of everything. Without it, nothing is possible. Well now, Easter finds me, like so many more, having a complete change by tackling my own garden. But my complete change lies not in the work, but in doing it under supervision, from the kitchen window. Me, mind you, who has gardened for half the crowned heads of Europe, as you might say. But it makes no odds. I have to toe the line with what little grace that I can scrape together. "Don't you dig up my bachelor's buttons," says the voice from the window. But as my mother used to say, there's none so deaf as those who won't hear. "Oh, give 'em bachelor's buttons," I mutter, "but leave 'em unharmed." Well, you know how it is. A long weekend of this makes me dread having a garden in my retirement, and so being under supervision every blessed day. One solution would be for the housing authority to find us a little place with the kitchen window facing the other way. It won't be much to ask after 50 faithful years on the land. Meanwhile, between you and me and the compost heap, I'll not be sorry to get back to my job, to return to where they daren't say a word for fear of upsetting me.
From troubles of this world I turn to ducks, beautiful comical things, sleeping or curled, their heads beneath their wings, or finding curious things to eat in various mucks beneath the pool. A peace, a tranquility resides in ducks, and they've come again to the village brook, 2 mallard pairs, to snout about and gobble and peer and waddle on yellow-varnished feet upon the banksides. When the big rains came in the night, and the brook burst its banks and sent a lake across the road towards the front door of the Axe and Compass Inn, there in their mad majesty, mid-roadway, swam the new season's village ducks. And a day or two later, when the floods had subsided, was that the northward dipping of the white rump of the first wheat ear of the year? Surely, yes, it was. Chiff-chaffs and wheat ears, the outriders of the summer migrants. Soon the trickle will be a flood. And here's James Ferguson-Lees with his report of bird movements during March.
Last month I finished with a reminder that the first summer visitors would soon be with us. Even so, the earliest report came much quicker than I'd expected, a wheat ear on Hilbury Island in the Dee estuary on the 1st. With such a send-off, it seemed that the mild weather might produce a lot of early arrivals, but in fact there were hardly any more in the next fortnight, and then we were in the midst of another cold spell, including a day of blizzards which seemed enough to discourage even the hardiest migrants. But it was that very day, the 15th, which produced the first small fall of chiff-chaffs and wheat ears on the south coast. And during the next 5 days, these 2 species were reported at a number of places from Devon round to Norfolk, and in Lincolnshire and Breconshire soon afterwards. There were also more blackcaps in the middle of the month, but though 1 or 2 of these may have crossed from France at this time, it's more likely that they were ones which had wintered here. 2 summer migrants which do seem to have made it rather earlier than usual are the little-ringed plover and the gargany, perhaps because they're both larger and more powerful birds. Little-ringed plovers began to appear in the Midlands and southeast England from the 15th onwards, while gargany really started off with a bang. 2 males and 3 females at one place in Bedfordshire on the 11th, and in the next 10 days a number of others in 8 or 9 counties south of a line from Lincoln to Somerset. Apart from the gargany and little-ringed plovers, then, the arrivals of summer visitors have not held to their early promise, and the same applies to March nesting. From the amount of song in February and early March, it seemed likely that it would be a very forward season, and indeed there were blackbirds and song thrushes with eggs in the first fortnight of the month, while rooks, starlings, sparrows, and crossbills were all building. Then came the cold snap, and most of the early nests were deserted. So far I've tried to confine myself optimistically to thoughts of summer and the nesting season, but one winter visitor which is still attracting a lot of attention is the Buick's swan. In recent weeks there have been sizable herds of 50 or more at several places in East Anglia, from Leicestershire across to Somerset, and as far north as Nottinghamshire and Cheshire. In Cheshire in particular, the numbers were quite abnormal in the first 15 days of the month, and included a flock of 100 flying east on the 10th. Finally, the rarity of the month has been an American killdeer plover in Derbyshire, the first in Britain since 1959. This stayed quite some time and was seen by dozens of people.
Northward from the sunshine of the Mediterranean and of Africa, the birds are flying to the countryside of Britain. The great breeding flight, the instinctual yearly journey of renewal. They seek the longer days, the short nights, the shelter of English hedgerows and woodland in which to rear their young, and the hoped-for abundance of insect life upon which to feed them. Springtime in Britain brings the heightening of another year of efficient farming, with all its chemical aids to modern husbandry. Just how is this efficiency affecting the crowning glory of the English countryside, the birds? Here is Stanley Cramp, who is Vice President of the British Trust for Ornithology.
Naturalists in this country first began to get seriously worried about the effects of agricultural chemicals on wildlife some 4 years ago, when there were mass deaths of birds in the grain-growing areas of eastern England. In some places, hundreds died, mostly wood pigeons, but also pheasants, partridges, and many smaller birds. And there were still more deaths in the spring of 1961, and residues of chemicals used in seed dressings were found in the bodies. Well, soon after this, a voluntary ban was agreed on the use of the three most deadly chemicals, aldrin, dieldrin, and heptachlor, on spring-sown wheat. And since then, this ban has been loyally observed by the farmers and others concerned. The high death rate has ceased, and we all hoped that this was the end of any serious threat to wildlife from chemicals. But a new and alarming situation has developed. Last year, the Joint Committee on Toxic Chemicals, set up by the British Trust for Ornithology and the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, received for inspection more bodies of birds suspected to have died from chemical poisoning than ever before, and a record number of species, 18 all. And toxic residues were found in 304 out of the 333 bodies analysed, and in 42 out of 46 samples of infertile eggs. Garden birds were at the top of the list, blackbirds, thrushes, and so on, but there were others from many different types of country. And it was this range of species which was most worrying, for it suggests that instead of big kills over a comparatively limited area, we are now facing a more deadly and insidious threat, the slow spread of poison throughout the countryside. Well, the agricultural chemicals have brought great benefits to the farmer, and many of them, such as the herbicides, are harmless to wildlife. However, the main trouble has been that the three chemicals banned for spring seed dressings were still used in many other ways, in sprays, garden chemicals, sheep dips, and the like. And it is these, the chlorinated hydrocarbons, that are highly persistent, passing from one animal to another, and which accumulate in species at the end of the food chain, such as birds of prey or fish eaters. And the numbers of some of these species of birds are falling. For example, the kestrel and the sparrowhawk, or the peregrine, where the pre-war population has dropped by a half, and only a quarter of the remainder are managing to breed successfully. Recently, too, golden eagles in western Scotland have suffered a catastrophic decline in fertility. Not only are their eggs failing to hatch, but some adult birds have shown a behavior disturbance which leads them to break and eat their own eggs. The scientists investigating this believe it is due to dieldrin used in sheep dips. Many naturalists feared that some of our largest and finest birds were doomed to extinction unless the use of these persistent chemicals was severely curtailed. Now, new restrictions on some of these have just been announced, and we welcome them as a step in the right direction. For the loss of these birds would be a tragedy in itself, but they also serve as indicators to the poisoning of the environment, which might, ultimately, have repercussions on agriculture, farm stock, and perhaps even man himself.
The days lengthen and lighten. The daffodils have started their springtime dance. The crocus falls, but the garden assumes in their stead the velvet of the wallflower. Everything in the garden, in fact, is about to be absolutely splendid. Cottage gardens, country gardens, chaffinches in flowering orchards, roses at the ready around every door. Idyllic, life in the country. And lucky you, say the townsmen friends, heading for home. That's the picture, one side of it. But there's another one, too. The countryside can be just as boring, brutish, and uninspiring as anywhere else. The eternal idyll is just not true. Elizabeth Gray and her husband Gary Hogg are writers who some time ago settled for the away from it all of the Kent-Sussex borders. Well, here are a few realistic reflections from Elizabeth Gray.
It's 10 years now since we made the change from town to country living. Our reasons at the time all seemed obvious. and practical. It would be cleaner, quieter, less smelly, cheaper, healthier and less hazardous. And there would be fewer distractions from our work as writers. How right were we? Well, the country's certainly cleaner, apart, that is, from the mud that gets tramped into the house on wet days, and the dust that blows off the fields when it's dry. But is it quieter? Admittedly, there's no background roar of traffic. I'm not sure that this is an advantage, though. A dull, steady hum can act as blotting paper for individual noises. In the comparative quiet of the countryside, children at play and barking dogs can be heard a mile away. The dear old puffing billy that used to rumble through our valley has been replaced by a monster that sounds like a flying bomb driven by a demented ice cream vendor. And a few months from now, the neighbouring farmer will drone past the kitchen window endlessly, carrying loads of hay, and, incidentally, belching out clouds of fragrant diesel fumes. Together with the scent of manure, they will keep the south-facing windows of our house permanently sealed. By that time, we shan't be able to open the west-facing windows either, because the wild bees that live in the plaster wall will be due to swarm. But our main problem is transport. With a husband often away on lecture tours and the village 2 miles away, a second car is no longer an undreamed-of luxury. It's a dire necessity, though we can't always use it. Last winter, for instance, the garage doors jammed solid with frozen snow, and we couldn't move either car. It hasn't been so bad this year, yet. Why do we stay here, then? Oh, 1,000 reasons. Easter time. The wild daffodil buds in the copse are fat and yellow now, dimming the memory of grey days past, and the lawn is royal with crocus purple and gold. The sitting room is still pungent with the scent of wood smoke, and the larder gay with bottled gooseberries and salted beans from last year's crops. Soon we'll hear the nightingale embroidering the still May nights with this lovely pattern of sound, and maybe catch a glimpse of a prowling badger in the headlights on a late-night drive. In the village, shopkeepers still have time to gossip, and talk about the weather means something here. One of the greatest lessons we've learned is that we were wrong in wanting to shut ourselves away with our work. No writer should be cut off from the very source of his material, life itself and the people around him. He needs the constant refreshment of contact, not with the anonymous mass of city dwellers, but with the sharply individual men and women of a small community. He needs to be conscious of things growing and changing with the seasons, the shifting pattern of ripening crops, the immensity of the sky. In fact, we came to the country for all the wrong reasons. We are staying on, we hope, for the right ones.
Yes, it's well that the lily be not over-gilt. Nonetheless, it needs no gilding when blows the wind southerly, the soil is warm, and crown imperial, that flagrant first of all the great lilies, bursts open almost as though it was sticking out its tongue at the parting winter. No need to gild this lily, nor the springtime music that makes everything so wonderfully worth it. The chorus of the early morning birds rising into its full April strength.
The Countryside in March was a recorded programme reflecting life in the British countryside during the past month. Those taking part were Bill Douglas, Eric Sims, Albert Butler, James Ferguson-Lees, Stanley Cramp, and Elizabeth Gray. The programme was introduced by C. Gordon Glover and produced by Arthur Phillips.